All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Happy September. I won't say it's my favorite month. October is my favorite, but it's September. In my mind, that means fall, but it's gonna be what, 109 on Friday? Like this week is supposed to be so hot. I don't know. I've been obsessing about it because I'm coaching soccer and softball, and I feel so mean like today having all these little 10 and 11-year-olds run around in like 105-degree weather. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys, water break, right? But 109 on Friday. That's like I'm not built for that. That's too hot. Like I won't fall. I'm ready for like, well, I have seen all the little TikToks, the little pumpkin guy dancing to September, and like that's where my mind is at too. So, but it's fall. Tomorrow is football. All good things, right? I'm excited for that, and we get to have another weekend after today. It's a short week. It's always a little weird. I don't like when we don't have school Monday. Like it kind of throws me off. I'd rather have no school Friday, but I guess we don't normally have Friday classes.
I was gonna say it's gonna be also Veterans Day off. I think.
Yeah.
So, like, oh no.
It's always nice to have a break, but it always makes me feel like I start the week off like on the wrong foot. Like I'm confused what day it is all week long, but that's okay. So happy Wednesday, happy September. We'll go back into where we were last time and talking about some of these different assessments. We got it like a third of the way through, so we'll kind of pick up where we left off. We didn't talk about these yet, right? That's what I have down in my notes. Does that look familiar? Right. So we talked a lot about intelligence tests. And there are obviously a few other kinds that we'll talk about today. And then, as I mentioned, this is the last chapter for setting the stage. So next week, when I see you on Monday, we will start getting anxious, right? Anxiety disorders next week, right? But a few more of these to go through. So we have talked about, like, if we go back here for 1 second, we talked about interviews, which are the most common, right? By far, right? You're always kind of doing this, especially in therapy, gathering information. That we could add a test of something like neurological or biological if we suspect that it's an issue, but not always. Intelligence tests, especially in schools. And so one other thing that we do a lot of, especially with kids, is we do something called naturalistic or analog observation. And naturalistic observation is just like it sounds. You're observing someone in their natural setting, right? It's really well termed. But you're watching somebody kind of observing what they're doing. It's almost like people watching with a purpose. I don't know if any of you like to people watch, but I think it's so interesting. I love to people watch at restaurants. I like to watch people on dates. Like we're trying to figure out how long they've been together.
I always about like being
Yeah.
there on the first date.
Totally, right? And sometimes you can tell the first date, like if it's going well or not going well, like that awkward moment when the checker arrives is always fun to watch, right? I don't know. I'm trying not to be obvious. You don't want to be obvious when people watch, but it's interesting. And you can get a lot of information, and so we do that here too. Like, for example, we could watch children playing on a playground. And what games are they playing? And who's interacting with who? And are there problem behaviors that come up? Like we can kind of just watch. And one thing that we sometimes do is like a little twist on this is something called an analog observation. And that's what's happening in this picture over here, where you set up a purposeful, like, I won't say experiment, but situation where you're observing with a purpose in mind. And you can do this down at our Child Development Center, which is kind of cool. I don't know if any of you have taken a class down there and have gotten to do this, but we have these little two-way windows or mirrors. And you can observe the kids in the classroom without them knowing that they're watching you. And that's called an analog observation. My daughter, my oldest, went there for 1 year. And so I would sneak down between classes and watch her through the mirror, and she'd have no idea. So after school, I'd be like, I saw that thing you did. And just keep it purposefully vague. And she'd be like, which one? You know, like all like curious. She was such a good kid. I didn't have any problems. Like she never did anything problematic. My twins, if I had observed them, it would have been a whole nother story. But you could watch and they forget after a time that you're watching them, right? In the beginning, they might be aware of it, but eventually people start to kind of act more naturally. You can record, maybe you're observing problem behaviors in a classroom, like how often do they lose attention? How often do they get up out of their seat? So you can get a lot of observational like information when you're watching people in their environment, either under a controlled circumstance like this, Or it could be something a little more natural, like on a playground or in a public setting, like a mall or something like that, for example. You get a lot of interesting information that way. You just have to be subtle, obviously, if you're doing this and it's not a formal thing. Yeah.
I like how it was the last week or the week before, you referred to James Bond, and I keep reminding myself of Casino Royale, but they kind of get onto that a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like, I don't know, is there a scene where they do a little of that? I'm trying to
I
remember.
feel like the introduction scene kind of does it, where it's like, they're kind of eyeballing and monitoring like
Hmm.
the person, where it's like, they don't, well, the person screws the dummy guy, like, the assistant guy was like, obviously messing around with his ear, but like, Bond and the guy are eyeballing this one guy, but they don't know that's their eyeballing.
Okay, yeah, and it could be that, or you could be listening or watching, it could go either way, but yeah, you're watching without any kind of, hopefully awareness that you're doing, because then people will act naturally. If you know you're being watched, you're gonna act differently, at least for a time, and then you might forget by that. You can also observe yourself. Self-monitoring is like journaling with a purpose. A lot of people will keep like track of a behavior. So let's say that you are struggling with anxiety. Maybe you keep track of situations that cause you anxiety or people that are causing you anxiety, and you rate your anxiety on a scale. Or you're struggling with addiction. You know, when do I go smoke a cigarette? Are there triggers? And you're trying to kind of identify those things through observing yourself. So all of these have to do with observation, whether it's writing or watching under a certain circumstance. And it can help us get some good information, right, that we can add to that battery of assessments that we're conducting. One of the most common things other than the interview that we often do is a personality inventory. These are very, very commonly given as part of a battery of assessments, right? As that group of tests that we give somebody. A personality inventory is some kind of test that you take. They're typically written or maybe even on like a computer on a piece of technology now, where you answer a bunch of different questions about yourself, right? You kind of rate yourself on a scale or how much you agree or disagree. There are tons of these. The most like sound one psychometrically is one called the MMPI-2, and that stands for Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Anyone in here taken the MMPI that you know of that you'd remember? It's a long test. I think 567 questions. Okay? Very long. It takes a couple hours to do. But when you complete this test, it gives you kind of a printout or a profile of your personality. Right? And what we can do is kind of use that diagnostic to help us assess for like mental illness. It also rates you on things like how introverted or extroverted you are, or how social or asocial you might be. It looks at like intelligence a little bit. It looks at different personality traits. It has a whole ton of different scales on it. And some of these questions are pretty outdated, like it probably should be updated again. But typically you answer like true, false, or cannot say to all 567 questions. And when you're done, as I mentioned, it gives you like this printout of where you fall on all those different scales, right? So they'll ask you stuff like, I enjoy being around people, right? True, false, cannot say. I enjoy going to parties, right? Again, same thing, right? I sometimes hear voices, right? So it has scales on there to assess for things like schizophrenia or like being out of contact with reality. And this one by far, as I mentioned, is the most like psychometrically sound, but there's a bunch of really like shorter ones that are much more informal. And I have one for you, and I guarantee a lot of you have taken some version of the Myers-Briggs Typology Indicator, the MBTI. So when you take this test, you get a 4-letter personality profile. And this one's really well supported. It's given in colleges all the time. So I have kind of like a shortened adapted version of it that I want to give you. So they call this one the CSI. It's based completely on the Myers-Briggs. And so what I'm going to give you is a piece of paper with 4 boxes. And again, it's forced choice. We do so many of these. So pick the one that is most like you. And what you can do is just read both sides and think about how you tend to be in general. Not necessarily how you feel right now, but how you tend to feel in general. And then you'll end up with a 4-letter personality type. at the end. So I'm gonna give you a few minutes to take this. You're not turning it in, it's just for your own interest and fun. Anyone taken the MBTI before? Know your 4-letter type? See if it's the same or different. And if you're torn between two, you could always mark that on here, like you're like right in the middle. Over your group. So again, read through and you're gonna just decide, am I E or I, am I S or N, right? And kind of, if you're right on the line again, pick one. Yeah, it's really common. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, so I'll take it this week, but moving forward, if you miss, which I know you weren't here, just email it to me that day. I'm still, but this kind of take, just know that moving forward. Yeah, I needed to too. And if you finish early and you're just kind of reading, I put up the website that's at the top of that page. And I'll talk about it more in a minute, but if you want to kind of look at what your type means, it's on here. Personalitypathways.com. You still reading, most of you look like you're done. I wrote my type up there. I am an ISFJ. Anyone else? ISFJ? Couple people, right? I'm always like torn, like the E versus I. I'm such a Gemini on that one. I'm like right in the middle, right? I think of myself as extroverted, but I always end up as introverted, which is kind of interesting. And so if you're torn like 50-50, you could look up both if you're curious. So there's lots of these online, but this one's pretty decent. If you go to personalitypathways.com, if you're interested, you can go here and look at the different types, and it will tell you kind of a description of your personality type, jobs that are common for your personality type. You can also, so many ads on this site, you can also take their version of the MBTI on here, where you answer individual questions, and it gives you your type at the end. Right, so this is a very, very commonly used test, right, if you will. So this Myers-Briggs typology indicator is very quick, very informal, but it gives you a 4-letter type. And this type, while it might not be diagnostic, there are a lot of correlations with those types. We look a lot at like jobs and careers and majors. So places like our College and Career Center use this as a great indicator of like what careers might be good for someone with a personality type like yours. So it's an example of how things like this could maybe correlate to real life. And it tends to be something that's pretty stable, right? If you've taken this before, most likely your like result is pretty similar. At least it should be. And which of those 3 metrics would that be? Like if it's the same every time you take it, is that reliability, reliability, validity, or standardization? You remember? Good to guess. Which one would be if it was the same every time you took it? Guessing. Got a 1 out of 3 chance. Reliability, right? So consistency or reliability, standardization would be giving it this way. So if you were to take this one and then take it online and you get the same thing, that would be a good example of like standardization. They're giving it in a way that's similar enough that you're getting the same result. So these, again, very commonly used, especially this one, even though it is pretty outdated at this point. Like one of the questions, I enjoy socials, right? Nobody calls parties socials anymore, right? I probably should be updated a little bit.
I was gonna say too, like, I think of social media when I hear that.
Yeah, right. More than a party, right? Any other like thoughts or comments or anything here before we keep going to the next one? Okay. Another type of inventory that we might use, and these are kind of fun. I think these types of tests tend to be really interesting. They're not the best in terms of like standardization, reliability, and validity, but they might reveal some information that other tests ignore. Projective tests. With a projective test, we give you something really vague, really unstructured, and then you project meaning onto it. That's where the name comes from, right? So I give you something random and you give it meaning with your response. One very easy example of this, there's something that we sometimes do with children called the incomplete sentence blank, or like the complete a sentence test would be another way of doing it. So we give you a sentence, something like, one of the ones that's on there is, if I only could blank. And then you fill in the blank. And we give you a bunch of these, and you're putting your own meaning onto it. When I look in the mirror, I laugh, cry, smile, right? What is your response, right? You're kind of putting something onto there in a very like vague, unstructured way. So we do this like sentence completion. Another one that we sometimes do is called the draw a person test. And this one's commonly used with kids. You ask a child to draw a picture of themselves, and the things that they include or don't include are really, really meaningful. If they draw themselves, bless you, do they draw themselves alone or with other people? If they draw their family, is everybody there? What is everybody doing, right? What are they wearing? What are they doing in the picture? Are they smiling? Are they not? But everything that they include in there comes from their mind and is thought to be meaningful. And so by giving you something really like vague and unstructured, we can see what you come up with and look for some themes and pieces that might be meaningful. Now, I'm going to give you like a very informal one. And I kind of made this one up, but we can use a lot of parallels from this. So that piece of paper I just gave you, I think is the back blank for everybody. You need like a blank piece of scratch paper. You're not turning it in. So you could use that one if you want. But I'm gonna have you draw something for me. Now, I will preface this by saying I'm incredibly unartistic. I have two very artistic children. They didn't get it from me. So don't feel bad if you are not good at drawing. But I want you to draw something, and I'm gonna give you something that I'm banking on you not knowing what it is. So if you do know what it is, it kind of ruins it, so don't look it up. So what I want you to draw me is I want you to draw me a blivet. Okay, so on that piece of paper, however you want to draw it, wherever you want to draw it, I'd like you to draw me whatever you think of, whatever comes to mind when I say draw me a blivet. And again, I'm banking on the fact that you don't know what that is. It's a real thing, I'll show you. And I know some of you are glaring at me like, please don't make me do this, right then, that's okay. Draw me a blivet, whatever comes to mind. If you draw nothing, that's meaningful too. But draw something, right? Put something on your piece of paper. I'll give you a minute or two. And then we can make a couple of inferences from what you did, okay? Draw me a blivet. I'm gonna look down because some of you have that look like I'm not happy with you right now, so I'm gonna look down, but draw me a blivet. Sorry, push the button. Much better artistic ability. I like it. That's really common. People do that more. I'm gonna give you like one more minute to perfect your blivet masterpiece, and then we can make some interpretations. I did this in a job interview for here. I made them draw, they were all glaring at me, right? But it was kind of a fun idea at the time. So now I keep doing it because it makes me feel nostalgic. All right, it looks like most of you are done. If you're still drawing, feel free to. So if you're a very concrete thinker like me, you probably would like to know what a blivet is. This is a blivet. It's an actual thing. It's this like indecipherable optical illusion where like the third leg kind of appears and disappears. Totally not the point, right? I picked something really random. Again, kind of banking on the fact that you wouldn't know what it is. But just like the draw a person test that I just erased over there, the things that you draw, where you draw them, how big they are, all sorts of things like that can sometimes be meaningful. Now, not always. It could be that they reflect your lack of confidence in the task or drawing ability. But in general, let's look at a few like things that we can sometimes infer things like this. So I wanted you to have a whole piece of paper, because where you draw it and the size that you draw it can sometimes be meaningful as well. Okay, so in general, if you draw something very small instead of large, small tends to represent shyness or insecurity. Again, it could be that you weren't feeling good about the task, but it could also be personality. If it's large, it tends to indicate confidence or assertiveness. If it's the entire page, maybe aggression, right, sometimes. If you drew nothing, maybe you were feeling overwhelmed or you have a lack of confidence. Again, it could be in the task. Where you drew it on the page, the top of the page tends to be more optimistic. Maybe you have a more optimistic style. The bottom of the page, more pessimistic. In the middle, more of a realist. If it's detailed or simple, sometimes that correlates to your personality. Are you very concrete versus more like abstract thinker? Is it creative or literal? Some of you drew like little creatures or little animals, others drew like blimps, tools. I saw like a shovel, a couple of tools, a couple of like, almost like joint kind of things, like PVC pipe looking kind of joints. So the things that you draw, are you more of a creative or literal kind of concrete person? The amount of pressure, is it very thick and a lot of pressure? That tends to indicate energy level. If it's very light, that could indicate that you're tired, right? More pressure, it tends to indicate that you have more energy. I think those are most of the big ones, but like things like that can sometimes be meaningful. Much more meaningful is that draw a person test, where again, if kids put like, let's say they include everyone in their family but dad. Why isn't dad in the picture? Right? What does that mean? You can explore that, right? Or what are the people doing in the picture, right? So sometimes pictures can be meaningful, and that's just for fun. So you can turn it over or destroy it maliciously, but some of them are really pretty impressive, which is nice. Mine wouldn't be, right? I think I'd probably just draw like a little swirl in the corner, right? And then I'd be tired and negative in the interpretation. But again, it could just be the task at hand. So with these tests, with these projective tests, again, it's something really ambiguous. And there are actual formal tests of this. One of them is called the TAT, the Thematic Apperception Test. Now, this is old, and you can tell by the pictures that it's old. They're black and white, they're grainy. They're meant to be timeless, but they do kind of appear to be old in that way. And if you look at the word thematic, theme, used to kind of represents like a theme or an idea that you're putting in here. So the idea here is that you're making up a story given a very vague, ambiguous picture. So a therapist, a clinician, would show you this picture. This is an actual one from the test. And say, I want you to come up with a story. What's happening? What are they talking about? What are they doing? What just happened? What's about to happen? You create a story or a theme for each picture that you're given. Now, I want you to find a couple of people around you, like 2, 3 people, whatever's convenient, whatever's easy. What's happening in this picture? Kind of like what comes to mind with this picture? Come up with a little like, share your thoughts or stories with the people around you. So find a couple of people, like 2 minutes, and then we'll talk about it together. But just whatever's convenient, 2, 3 people, what's happening here? All right, partner up with people around you. What do you think? There's a couple of these, so you'll do a couple of them.
Yeah, it's gonna be and she's like, I don't think it's why I see it as a she said.
I just woke up like.
All right, what do you think? So again, there's no right or wrong. You can say your people if you want, but there's a few that will do. But there's no right or wrong answer to this. I will say there are typical answers and atypical answers, but there's no right and wrong, right? The idea is you come up with a story. Sometimes people project what's going on in their lives onto the story. Not always. It might not come up with one, but if I give you 10 of these, there might be like a little bit of a theme there. Sometimes. So, what do you think what's happening here? Again, no right or wrong. Like, what did you talk about? What did you think? What's happening? Anyone think of Valak? I always think of Valak from like the Nun. I think it's the time of year. No? Nobody else? Like, I'm thinking of like the Conjuring and the evil nuns in the background. And I know what's going on in my head, right? But yeah.
It seems like the old lady knows something that's under doing this,
Yeah.
or maybe she does, but she seems a little avoidant. I kind of thought the old lady was creepy at first, but she kind of like dreaming, like not necessarily very creepy, just kind of like.
She kind of looks mischievous, right? Like she's got like a little bit of a
Like she's thinking about something, maybe she's plotting.
okay. She does kind of have a plotting look to her, like a little bit of a like smirk. Yeah. Yay.
It looks like Snow White bunny apple.
Totally.
Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, bunny apple.
That's a very common one, right? It's like kind of like a Snow White-ish vibe to it, like, for sure. What else? What else came to mind? Anything else with this picture? Even if it's not like the whole thing, what, any other associations, thoughts? Anyone think the person in the front is male? No? Okay. The projectors are like, I'm done with you. So sometimes it'll come back. Sometimes the person in the front, they made that person ambiguous on purpose. Most people say female, but sometimes people will say male or like non-binary or something to that extent, which could be an interesting like gender kind of thing. Any other thoughts? It'll come back in a minute, but anything else about that picture that came up for you? It was almost a hand break. Yeah.
Just because. Maybe she is into it.
Okay.
It seems like they're like that. Maybe that.
Okay. Interesting. I like it. Yeah.
One of the things that we kind of discussed was, it's like their contact is completely opposite of each other, and it's
Okay.
kind of like they have different views of what's going on, and that's probably what you were mentioning earlier, where it's like the lady person has that like mischievous look is because like maybe the young youthful person might be thinking, okay, no, that's not gonna work, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
So-
I see like a mischievous look, right? Eventually, I don't know why it's like strobing on this here, but yeah, so there's very often themes of like plotting, mischievousness. Snow White comes up a lot. Sometimes what we see, very common theme, this is a young person thinking about their grandparents or a parent, or an older person remembering when they were younger, or worrying about a granddaughter or like a daughter or something like that. Those are very common themes. So sometimes you see like themes emerging of like, oh, this person is worrying about what will happen when she gets older. She's afraid of getting older. Or this older person is thinking back and on the regrets of her youth. They're like, what, something like that. Yeah.
What's the life or one of them's gonna die, like.
Mhm. Nothing necessarily, right? But if you keep coming up with that theme in each one, maybe it's a fear that's on your mind or something that's kind of in the back of your mind, right? And not always. That's the tricky thing with these tests. Sometimes people are just creative, right? And you're being creative and having fun with it, and it doesn't represent anything with your life. And so it's the psychologist's job to tease out what's real and what isn't, right? But again, you're typically given several of these. I have one more for you. This one's very rich in content. So with your group, this is an actual one as well. I want you again, what's happening in this picture? So with your partners again, what's happening here?
Possibly could be with somebody else. If I don't lay it down, think about it.
You said it, I'm not crazy, it's not my sleep, it's not crazy.
So wait. But the fact that you're.
I can see
I'm sorry. I'm sure my daughter.
Yeah.
But it feels like you can.
Yeah.
You're like, there's no food. I can resonate with it. I like that. I mean, if you're reading, we should be Right, so this picture is very rich in content, right? There's something happening in this picture for sure, right? And don't be afraid that if you say like he murdered her or something like that, I don't make assumptions. There's clearly something very like off here, right? So what came up? What do you think is happening here? Yeah.
I had like an initial reaction and then I like looked at the rest of the picture, had a second reaction.
Sure.
My initial ones were like a passive statement, kind of, I'm white knuckle sweat from military.
Okay, like American Psycho.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the second one, I realized it doesn't necessarily look like he's wearing a belt, at least your belt, it looks like he's wearing socks and fits the shoes. So he could have like been like a morning after, that's like, I'm done with this, I gotta go to work now, I'm like, I'm tired, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe he's like shameful of the night before, because it doesn't look like it was done in the 70s based off the ties, but.
Okay. Yeah, like a one night stand,
Yeah.
the next morning, like, oh God, what happened, right? Like, or shame, or like, you look better last night, I don't know, or something, right? Some kind of theme. Or that he killed her. It's a very common theme. There's something really unnatural about the way she's laying, right? Like, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that she isn't alive. Yeah.
I don't know, like this, but also the fact that like for men, it's the face of the wall, like typically your head's to the wall.
Interesting, okay, but that's a little detail that might not be noticed by everybody, right? But it was noticed by you, right? So those things are interesting that you would pick that up and maybe somebody else wouldn't, right? Is that a hint?
The positive, I think, the lady is raped by someone else and the rapist killed her, after the rape, and the man went to the house and he got her like
Okay, yeah, somebody murdered her, like, okay, so you're saying like raped and murdered her and he found her, kind of like thing, right? Not an uncommon theme. I know it might seem scary to say that when I just said these could be meaningful, but those are common themes that come up with this. Again, something very unnatural about it, yeah. Okay,
And then I think that with dark space, you're able to kind of sort of make out like his nose and his chin and everything.
okay,
With her, you kind of just see maybe where the start of her forehead is when the eyebrows are on, then her tongue.
yeah,
So like when I first saw him.
yeah, right. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Her face is very difficult to see, and then you can't see that face either. So kind of hidden faces here, it could be indicative of something, yeah.
One thing I heard, like, in being murdered, is there's no change in photo, I mean, like, she's, and also, a lot of the times, if you murder someone, you don't, like, not really on a pillow, you kind of just kill them. But the fact that she has a pillow under her head makes me think that, like, because they were doing stuff, that's why.
Okay.
I feel smart, I'm not.
Not gonna lay them gently on the pillow, okay, right? Good to know, right? Yeah, I mean, there is something that like kind of makes it, there's a very sexual theme here. Right, and so if somebody completely ignores the like nudity and the sexuality of this, that can be meaningful, right? That maybe they have discomfort with sexuality or like repression or some kind of history with that, or just it could be just discomfort as well, yeah.
So I just thought of it because of a lot of movies will be times for like the guys like staying up late working on something and their wife or whatever is like. And the way that he kind of looks tired and if you see like in the chair next to the table and like books, so maybe it's like working late or something.
Okay,
But she was already like asleep, so maybe like now he's getting to kind of either join her or no.
okay, interesting, right? Anybody else? Anything else here? Let me give you an example of like a really atypical response, okay? So he's tired from reading the books last night, right? Like he's wiping his eyes because he's tired from reading the books. Completely ignores the fact that there's a woman in bed who's like happy, right? Or like, all you notice is the painting from the corner and you don't notice the people at all, right? And the more you look at these, the more you can find stuff, right? That you could really like nitpick with these. But there are common themes in like murder and sexuality are really common within these. But let's see how it could like come up as a theme here. So let's say we go, another one that we sometimes hear. This is a father who just walked in, he found his daughter had committed suicide last night. Okay, go back to the last one. This is a young, maybe one of them just expressed to the other that she's depressed and having a hard time. Now we have a theme of like depression coming up. And I think these pictures lend themselves to depression. They're old, they're black and white, they're grainy. So sometimes you get those themes anyway. But like if you have this theme of like, oh, she's plotting some kind of like sinister event, and then you get to this one and it's like murder, right? Now we have like these themes. And when you have a bunch of them that you're doing, sometimes people will insert like themes onto them. Not always, but sometimes. And also interesting as a side note, single bed, right? Like single bed is not common. Right, maybe more common back in the 50s, but not even in like the 70s when these were coined. So you look for these themes in them. This one's really commonly used with like adults. And again, therapist's job to kind of tease out what's creative versus what's meaningful. More commonly used though, the Rorschach ink blot test. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen these before or heard of this before. The Rorschach ink blot test was developed by Herman Rorschach back in the 1920s, really informal. It was like 1921. He dropped ink on a piece of paper, folded it in half to create like a mirror image, and he would show it to people and say, what do you see? Right, it's been formalized and standardized since. So these are both actual images on the Rorschach ink blot test. So you would show this to someone and you tell them to list for you everything you see. And you record, do they only see the white? Do they notice the white before the black, or the black before the white? Do they see whole pictures or small fragments? Are there themes that emerge? Again, themes are big with projective tests. So in your partners, again, like look at both of these, just share some of the things that you see in them. These are a little more abstract. I think there's less meaning in them in a sense. But with your partners, what do you see in these pictures? Take like 2 minutes and share.
Right. I see, like,
I see two people high fiving, and then I see a spaceship in the middle, and I'm like, oh my the left was like this evil bunny, like head looking at me.
I don't know, like.
I also see like two people like dancing around something in the middle. I think it's something I see wishes like dancing around a cauldron or something.
You're like, I'm ready for Halloween.
It almost looks like not quite like Setmire. Yeah. I kind of look like since like what's happening. Did you see anything from the right?
Yeah, like it's basically the eye.
Okay, you also saw that. I really see that spaceship. That's how they get that. Right? Like,
The white part, like their beard.
I don't see
Like. Yeah.
All right, next, I want to hear what you came up with. I'm like hearing bits and pieces. Start with this one, right over here on the right. What's happening? What's happening here? Yeah.
It seems like, two parents meet and high five.
Totally. I see two bears high fiving, but you know, two bears, two people, two something high fiving, right? There's definitely like, that's a common one here. Yeah.
It's a little elephant.
Okay.
The like gray parts on the top of their hats. There's like a little blotch right under the hat foot or their big noses.
Okay.
The white part is probably their beard.
Uh-huh.
And they're wearing like hobbit gear so that they don't really have like body shape.
Okay. We got like Bilbo and Frodo. And
Yeah, I don't know the actual name.
No, but like, okay, you can see like with the hat, especially, you know what's funny about these too, is when somebody sees somebody, sometimes it's hard for you to then unsee it, anyway, yeah,
I see somebody crying in agony and grief.
over here,
Yeah,
okay.
the top of the gray, like the little indents, and then there's like a white, just like the eyes. And then
Okay.
the white represents to me like the bags underneath your eyes.
Interesting,
And then the little white dot in the middle, above the thin black line is the nose, and then the mouth.
Yeah.
Is the entire white part.
okay, I can see that, for sure, okay, yeah,
I saw like two sides of that one, a pin.
okay, oh, yeah, uh-huh.
And then I also saw a ballerina.
Yeah.
in the white,
That's common too, all of those, right, anybody else on the right? First thing I always see is a spinning top in the middle, like a little spinning top, and sometimes it's interesting, are people drawn to the white or the black? Like, before each other, and sometimes it's just a picture. How about the other one? The other side, yeah,
Yeah, I saw a fox.
okay,
Was the first one, and then I saw what could be like Megatron or something. Two dead bears.
Okay. So they were high fiving and now they're dead, right? Yeah.
Oh, I see both, four eyes, so it's more like a dip or something.
Ooh, okay. Okay, I like it, yeah,
I see the spaceship.
a spaceship, Anybody else on the left? I see like, and it could be, you were talking about how it could be Halloween. I've been watching like all these witch and vampire shows, so like I see like a warlock. Here's his hands, he's going like this. He has no head, I don't know what happened there, right? Here's where his head should be, and like here's his torso and his body, here's his feet. This would be like a cape, right? A lot of people see a mask or like a pelvic bone. Is another really common one that people see. Here's one more. So most of these are black and white, but some of them have color. So last one, with your group, what do you see here? Last one.
Yeah, I see love.
The love and like.
Yeah.
And then
Before I looked at the black, I looked at the colors, and I saw snake horses. And then I saw snake horses, like two, but then I also saw the yellow, like the first dot. And I was like, oh, they're pregnant, the snake horses are pregnant. I don't know why, like, but then I saw the black and I thought. Yeah. Right from the dad, and I was like, oh, yeah.
Given the ocean.
The two green right above the says that sprawl out of place.
Yeah. We got crabs, we got seahorses, we got eels, we got goldfish. We got like sand crabs.
There's totally like an underwater theme. for this one.
I didn't think that would
What do you think about this one? Again, this one's colorful, right? Like, I think you could almost, a lot of people will see like a scene here, but what do you think? Yeah,
You look at it from one direction, like how it is. I saw human anatomy.
okay,
I
yeah.
saw the lungs, the
Yeah.
heart. If you flip it upside down, it's a dragon head.
Oh, I like that, creative, right? Anatomy is really common, like lungs, parts of the body, that's a very common theme here, yeah.
For me, I was telling my buddy here, I'm like, it's a robot in drag.
Okay, robot in drag, okay. You'll have to explain. Where do we get the robot? Is at the top? Is it the-
Yeah.
Or just the
I
whole
guess
thing?
the green is, I feel like it's the legs and like, I feel like blue is the torso, arm,
Oh, okay, like,
and then
okay,
the pink is kind of like the poofy thing, so that's how I was like,
Okay. okay, interesting, all right, a little harder for me to see, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, right? What else? Yeah,
I was gonna say the ocean, but
Yeah.
I just seen like a little face in there.
okay,
Like the green on the bottom is like a little mustache, right above the eyes. the
Oh,
face,
yeah.
like, eyebrows and like crazy little hairdo that's on.
right, wild hair, right? I like it, right? Yeah,
At first it looked like two like fish jumping each other, and then it just looked like really really interesting. Order like really interesting meal they bring out made of like sauce, meat, cheese.
oh, right, this is $40, right? Yeah, wrong, right? If you're lucky, I had the same time, they probably 80. Did you have a-
Yeah, I see with the garden, so.
Yeah.
like, the garden that's mixed flowers.
Okay. I just watched the new, like, I was just watching all the aliens movies to get ready for the new one, and so I'm like, that's the queen up at the top, and there's her other aliens right here on the side, like, because I just watched it, that was on my mind. Very common to get like underwater themes here, it kind of looks like a water scene or anatomy. This one's always interesting to me, okay, so I've been showing this picture for years as I've taught this class, and it's changed for me over time. Right, so when we were trying to get pregnant with our kids, it took us so long, it took us like a year and a half, we thought we were just missing an ingredient, and it ended up being way more complicated than that. And so I saw ovaries with an egg in it, right? That was like the first thing that came to my mind because it was what was going on in my life. I saw an ovary with an egg, right? I was like, God, this is the egg, it's right there, right? Like I saw that. And then when my kids were little, mermaids. Right, this is a mermaid here on this side, it's a mermaid on the other side, they were obsessed with like Sophia the First, this was the underwater, like, palace and like the mermaids swimming and whatnot. I've also seen needle nose pliers right here, like depending on like what I'm focusing on in my life. So sometimes these can have meaning to them. Other times it's just like a creative, like what you're describing, but there are some interesting correlations to intelligence that come out of these tests. How many things do people see, right? The more things that you can identify and see tends to correlate with higher intelligence. Again, themes can sometimes emerge with these as well. So aliens, for example, so I can explain mine very logically, right? I just watched like 2 aliens movies to get ready for the new one. So it's something that's on my mind. But if people are like, oh, I see like an alien scene here, and then on this one, two aliens high-fiving, this is like an alien mask, right? Aliens tend to represent feeling alienated and alone, loneliness, feeling different. And so sometimes with these, people put meaning onto them when they're kind of meaningless. You would never use these alone, right? It's not enough information. But as part of that battery of tests, could be interesting, right? Especially with kids who might not realize that you're getting information from something that looks so vague and like unstructured. Did you have a?
I was gonna say that I see it.
Yeah. Interesting, right? Yeah. And like once somebody points it out again, sometimes it makes it easier to see it. Any other thoughts with these, or questions, thoughts, comments with these before we move on? Yeah. So this is the mermaid here. So here's like her body, her tail, or like her mermaid tail, her body. This will be her hair and her face. It's abstract, but you know, mermaid.
That also
Right.
looks like you could use it in a microscope.
Sure. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And that's another really common one. Yeah. Sure.
With that like certain blog, like connected to the thing, yeah, looks more like really.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. See, I see it as like head, hair, head, body, tail, and then she's like holding something. I bet everybody sees things differently, which is what's so interesting about these. Right, a crab at the beach, right? Definitely something sea life going on here. So again, you would never use that alone, but it could be interesting. So once we've given somebody all of these things, right? So we've given, again, what we would call a battery of tests or assessments, which just means a variety, right? So maybe we interviewed someone and we gave them some projective tests. They took a personality inventory and we observed them for a week at their school, or had their teacher observe them. We gathered all this information. The whole point of gathering all that is to arrive at a diagnosis. Okay, now we have all this information about what does it mean? How can we take all that about you,
well, it's like-
take all of that and apply it and look for what do we think is going on? And that's the whole goal of assessment, right? Is all that and we arrive at a diagnosis, a determination that your symptoms, the things that you have going on, reflect a particular disorder, or maybe disorders. There might be more than one. And the book that we use to help us with this is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We're currently in the 5th edition with a text revision, so 5TR, they sometimes call it. And this has been around for a very long time. You can see this is number 2. The first one, and they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as they go along. Right? The first one was really tiny, and then a little bigger, bigger. Now this one's huge. It's a great doorstop. It's like this thick, right? A really thick book. And it has every disorder that is recognized by the American Psychological Association, or the APA. Everything that's recognized is in it. And it's a little different here than it would be in other countries. Other countries use different systems, which we might talk a little bit about. So once we're diagnosing you, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. The current diagnostic or coding system looks like the first example up there, where we say diagnosis, severity, additional information, right? So let's say we say diagnosis. Let's go with like major depression. So you would put the disorder or main disorder that you think somebody has after that diagnosis. And then there's a severity rating, which is usually on a scale of 1 to 5. How severe do we think it is? So 1 would be really mild, 5 would be profound, say 4. I'm giving you just an example. And then additional information. Is it anything else that we deem to be relevant? Okay, and this is something that incorporates, this is the old system down here. I put it up here and I might ask it of you as well, because some people still kind of use it as a guideline. In the past, what we used to do is we diagnose someone on 5 axes, 5 layers, if you will. So axis 1 was the clinical. So if we put this in another way, axis 1, we would say major depression. Axis 2 is if they have any kind of global like personality disorders, anything that affects the entire person. Let's not give our person names, we'll say any. Axis 3 would be any kind of general medical conditions. Are there any medical conditions that might affect their diagnosis? So let's give our person, let's say they have obesity and diabetes. Blood sugar levels can sometimes affect your mood, right? Like my father-in-law is diabetic, his mood is all over the place depending on his blood sugar levels. So this information might be relevant to the diagnosis. Then on axis 4, it goes this way. I use Roman numerals very often. Any kind of social or environmental problems. So let's give this fictional person something bad that happened in their life. That's something that might make someone depressed, like a negative life event. What was that? Oh, it's so dark, right? Okay, so family ran in a fire. Okay, let's give them one more thing. What was that? Yeah, senior family died would definitely, right? We'll connect to that, but yeah.
Dog died.
Oh, so, the dog, right? Okay. Dog died.
Oh no, dog ran away.
No, it's too late. The dog's dead, right? Poor dog, right? The dog died and they lost their job. Poor person lost job, right? Okay, so all these things might be exacerbating or partially explaining the depression. Right? They're relevant stuff in their environment that could play a role in their diagnosis. Then finally, on the old system, 5, was you give them a scale from 0 to 100, right, of like how they're doing. 0 would be like you would almost never get 0, it's as bad as it could be, almost never get 100, it's as good as it could be, let's give them like a 1 or something like that. Okay, so in the new system, you would put all this here. So you would say additional information, we have obesity, diabetes, their family. Like the thought of like Lemony Snicket's like series of unfortunate events. They're all family died in the fire, right? Family died, the dog, and the job, right? Right. So you add all that information up here as like additional stuff. You're painting a clinical picture of this individual, right? And so in the old way, we did it on these 5 axes, and that's what would go on each one. The new way is much simpler, right? But you would put it all here, like their obesity and diabetes, their medical health, their family and circumstances, all of that might play a role in your diagnosis and severity. Okay, so we're kind of looking at the whole picture, using that battery of tests or battery of assessments, examining all of the symptoms this person had and arriving at a diagnosis. And when we have that diagnosis, it's not just the disorder or disorders, you can have more than one. It's painting a clinical picture of that individual, right? And everything going on for them. And as a side note, if you go to therapy, ever, they have to diagnose you, right? Session 1, they diagnose you. It might be wrong, they'll change it later, right? But they have to for insurance purposes. And so this is something that is done every single time. And again, it can often be adapted and changed or added to, but every therapist is required for charting and insurance to give a diagnosis, especially if you have insurance. People who criticize this system, there's a lot of critics of this system, by the way, right? Talk about one of the dangers of diagnosing people being that you're labeling someone. If you've ever had a label, labels can be damaging, right? If somebody says, okay, you have ADHD, now your teacher might view you differently, treat you differently. You view yourself differently, and you might come up with excuses. My mother-in-law, always like, oh, I can't, I have ADHD. I'm like, you're just a bad listener. It's not that you have ADHD, you're a bad listener, right? Don't use that, right? My daughter has ADHD. Like, I know what that looks like. You don't have it, right? My mother-in-law, love that woman. She's my challenge in life, right? I was worried that she'll listen to my recording one day and be like, you talk crap about me a lot. Like, I'll say it to your face. But you might cause you to view yourself or somebody else differently. That's really common with diagnoses. It could change reality, right, for you. People have like self-fulfilling prophecies, right? If you've ever been diagnosed with something, it can sit with you. Labels can sit with you for a long time, and maybe it wasn't even correct, right? It's very common that people get wrong diagnoses if you weren't assessed properly, or maybe you were young to have a proper assessment or whatnot. But they can also be really helpful if we know that you have depression. Now we know what to treat you for. If I know you have ADHD, I can help make an educated plan to support you. Sometimes that allows you extra services at school if you have that diagnosis and a letter from a therapist. So it's a really mixed bag. And our system is very diagnosis heavy. As I mentioned, you have to diagnose someone. So what I want to do is give you a very different perspective. And I think it's a really interesting one, even though it's really unpopular. But I want you to see the other side of this. So I have a little homework assignment for you. And I'm going to post this after class today. The article is on Canvas and it'll pop up, I believe, at 10 is when I set it for. So this is going to be due on Monday, and you can just handwrite it and bring it with you. Or you can type it, it's up to you. I gave you a little excerpt from a book called The Myth of Mental Illness. Now, this is an old book. It was written in like the 50s, okay? But it's a very popular counter argument to this dominant perspective. And I want to give you the chance to kind of think critically about it and have a counter perspective. So in this article, or in this book, he argues that mental illness is a myth, right? That we shouldn't be diagnosing people, and there's a lot of reasons why. And so what I gave you, you'll see it pop up on Canvas, is a little excerpt from the book. I also read it out loud. If you'd like to, if you miss the sound of my voice between now and Monday, you can listen to it. Or if you just process things better that way. So after you read it or listen to it, you're going to answer these 3 questions. You'll summarize his main ideas. What are some of the reasons he presents for calling mental illness a myth? What are his claims and how does he support it? Number 2, do you agree? Right? You don't have to agree or disagree all the way, but what's your opinion about what he puts out there? And number 3, kind of thinking about how do diagnoses stigmatize people and what ways might they help or hinder? Like we were just talking about. So this will pop up on Canvas, as I said, I believe at 10 o'clock, but this is due on Monday. So make sure that you read through that. Again, there'll be an announcement that goes out about it. If you're not going to be here Monday for some reason, make sure you email it to me on Monday so that you get credit for doing it. But this will be your 3rd participation exercise. So it is worth 10 points. Okay, so I think what I'll do, I'll stop here and I'll leave this up. And then next time we'll kind of talk about your reactions and thoughts. There was one more slide too here about kind of like how do we decide on treatment. So we'll wrap that up and then we'll move on to anxiety disorders, right? On Monday, finally to the disorders. So I'll leave this up if you want to take a picture, if you have any questions. Otherwise, have another wonderful weekend and I will see you on Monday. Peace.